Bueno, buenos días. En nombre del equipo organizador de la cuarta conferencia colombiana, les damos la bienvenida a este quinto y último día de esta semana. Primero que todo, les pedimos disculpas por estos pequeños problemas técnicos y pues por favor esperamos nos disculpen por toda esta situación. A partir de ahora voy a empezar a hablar en inglés. Para los que tienen el equipo de traducción, el canal es el canal 1 y todo este panel será un evento en inglés. So, first of all, good morning. It's a pleasure for us to have you here on this fifth day of the Colombian conference for a panel on the discussion of post-conflict development, how to finance it, and the role of international aid, the Colombian government, and local communities. We would want to thank you for being here. Please ask you to excuse us for the technical glitches we had starting this day, but hopefully we'll have a great event. We should start by thanking the people who made this possible, especially the Harvard Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, the parent institutions that have supported us, meaning BU, Boston University, the Pardee School and the History Department, MIT, Harvard in general as an institution, and the Fletcher School and Tufts, who have provided their support to make this event possible. This event is possible thanks to the effort of the student associations of Colombian students of all these institutions. It is a student-led event, and we are very proud, and hopefully you are enjoying and learning a lot. It's been a long week. We've gone through art, we've gone through science. Today we are going to more the typical issues that we talk about when talking to Colombia, meaning post-conflict, hopefully, and conflict resolution, and the role of international actors on these topics. So let me introduce this panel by saying a couple of words of our panelists. We have Sarah Ann Lynch, and the director of who's the Senior Deputy Assistant Administration of the Bureau for Latin American and the Caribbean at USAID. And we have the director of the Colombian Presidential Agency for Cooperation, Dr. Alejandro Gamboa Castilla. Unfortunately, the third panelist, Professor Kimberly Thyden, who was scheduled to participate in this event, will not join us due to a family emergency, and on behalf of the organizing team, we take this opportunity to send our best wishes to her and her family. So let us start with the panel by a brief introduction of our panelists. Sarah Ann Lynch joined USAID's Bureau for Latin American and the Caribbean as a Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator in January 2015. Before joining LAC, Ms. Lynch was the Mission Director in Iraq, where she oversaw a complex portfolio focused on governance, democracy, and economic growth. Prior to her assignment in Iraq, Ms. Lynch was the Director of the Office of Iraq and Arabian Peninsula Affairs in USAID's Middle East Bureau. A member of the Senior Foreign Service, Ms. Lynch has been with the agency since 1993 and has served overseas in Bangladesh, Peru, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Since joining USAID, Ms. Lynch has received numerous awards, including USAID's Distinguished Honor Award in 2010, the agency's highest performance award for her service in Afghanistan and OAPA. Before starting her career in the Foreign Service, Ms. Lynch worked in both international business and for a non-governmental organization. Ms. Lynch also served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco, where she taught English at the secondary level. Ms. Lynch is a graduate of Mount Holyoke College and holds a master's degree from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University and the National War College. Alejandro Gamboa Castilla, Director of the Colombian Presidential Agency for International Cooperation, has been Director of the agency since 2014. Before joining APC, Dr. Gamboa was a senior advisor to the executive director at the Inter-American Development Bank. Previous to his time at IDB, he was a senior advisor to the executive director at the World Bank for 2 years. In his native Colombia, Gamboa was the director of special projects at the Ministry of Defense, where he oversaw the U.S.-Colombia Counter-Narcotics Defense and Security Cooperation Program, Plan Colombia, and executed the budget and management transition from the U.S. to Colombia of related security programs. Dr. Gamboa holds a degree in economics from Los Andes University in Bogota and a master's in international affairs from Columbia University in New York. For his achievements in the field of international finance, he was awarded the Organization of American States Scholarship in 2001. As I said, Mr. Gamboa is joining us via webcam from Bogota, and we will start the panel with the remarks by Ms. Sarah Ann Lynch. Thank you.
Gracias, Juan. Buenos dias. Thank you very much for that warm welcome. Welcome to Alejandro, my colleague. We've known each other for several years. And I think he and I would both agree that the technical difficulties that you experienced at the beginning demonstrate one of our main points is that you have to be flexible and agile and respond to changing circumstances when you work in international development. So anyhow, thank you for making that point and demonstrating that for us, Juan. With that, I thought what I would do is talk to you a little bit. I know the point here is to talk about Colombia. You've had a full week on Colombia, culminating with international assistance. But what I thought I'd do is tell you a little bit about USAID first, and then what we do in Latin America and the Caribbean to put the Colombia effort in context. And then I'll do a deep dive on Colombia and talk to you a little bit about what I see as the challenges and opportunities and even the lessons learned going forward. So really briefly, who are we? USAID, for those that don't know, we are the lead agency in international development for the US government. Other government institutions like State Department and Commerce run development assistance programs, but they're much smaller. So USAID runs the bulk of those programs. We have a global presence. We have a multi-billion-dollar portfolio across the globe, and we work in many sectors, including democracy, environment, health, education, and infrastructure activities as well. We have work with the government. We make up what we call the 3 Ds, diplomacy, defense, and development. So we work very closely with the Department of Defense, very closely with Department of State, and then USAID. We make up kind of the national security strategy toolkit. So there are three legs of that stool, and we are one of them. Our mission statement tells you why we do what we do, and I'll come back to some of this later, but our mission statement is that we partner to end extreme poverty and promote resilient democratic societies while advancing prosperity and security here at home. So I'll come back to some of these things later, but partnership is very important to us, democracy, of course, is very important to us, and prosperity and security. How we do this, we work with integrated country development strategic plans wherever we work, and that means vetting all of our interests with the host country governments, with other stakeholders like the private sector, NGOs, wherever we work, and so that we have complete overlap of USG interests and country interests, and that's the space in which we work. We have 2 lines of effort generally, USAID. We have humanitarian assistance and we have development assistance. Mostly what I'll talk today about is development assistance, but many people know us best for our humanitarian efforts, sometimes post-earthquake, like you recently saw in Ecuador, where after they declared a disaster and requested U.S. government assistance, we responded with things like emergency shelter, food, water, medicine, those things that you need right after an emergency like that. So within Latin America and the Caribbean, we work in all 3 subregions, Caribbean, Central America, and South America. We have a $1 billion portfolio in this region. Colombia makes up a significant portion of that. We are co-located, USAID, in 13 missions, co-located with the embassies, 13 missions in this region. And then we have 3 non-presence countries, meaning we have no staff, but we have programming. And you might guess that those countries are Ecuador, Venezuela, and Cuba, and we have strong support for civil societies in those countries, supporting the president's mandate to improve and enhance civil society throughout the globe. So that's what we are doing in those areas. We also have regional programming and economic growth and environment, so we're a pretty busy organization. In this region, our main priorities geographically are Central America, the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, where we focus on citizen security, and then Haiti, where we try to move it from post-earthquake to development assistance, and then Colombia is our third geographic priority in this region. In terms of sector priorities, we very much focus on promoting democracy across the Americas, and then environmental resilience, because this region is home to a lot of severe and extreme even climate issues, especially in the Caribbean. Annually, they deal with quite a bit in the Andean countries, dealing with glacial melt and issues of that sort. So our main challenges in this region are three. Income inequality. There's a great disparity between rich and poor, and in fact, this region has the highest income inequality of any region that USAID works in. Security, of course, to address the root causes of some of the illegal migration in Central America that I referenced earlier, the gang issues, the transnational crime in the Caribbean, the increase in drug production in the region. And then finally, governance is very important, because without strong institutions, you can't attack and address many of the issues that we'll talk about today. So now drilling down on Colombia, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So we have been in Colombia, USAID, for over 50 years. So we've been with Colombia through thick and thin, throughout the Civil War, and we plan to be there in the future. Colombia is a very strong partner of the United States, and we continue to assist. In the past, when we were there pre-2000s, we worked in many different sectors, worked at the national level and the local level. But I would say our current period of assistance really begins in the early 2000s with Plan Colombia. And I think my colleague Alejandro will talk more about that, because he's much better versed in those issues. But for our part, the issues that were really addressed under Plan Colombia were security and the drug trade. And for USAID, that meant our increased involvement in alternative development options, so promoting licit opportunities for those who are involved in the drug trade. So we worked for many years in that space. Fast forward to the lead up to Peace Colombia. It's not new to us. We've been working on peace in Colombia for many, many years, and we work in many, many sectors in many regions in Colombia. And where we work is in 40 of the most highly impacted regions. So we don't shy away from working in difficult and insecure areas. How we do it is we support the government of Colombia's national consolidation plan. So whatever we do meshes with what the government of Colombia does and asks us to assist with, and we support. And why we do this is primarily to strengthen state presence in the rural areas. So these are some of the most neglected areas in the country throughout the Civil War. And we have gone there to address issues of services and also economic opportunities for the folks in those regions. Specifically, our work works in the agriculture area, because there are many, many opportunities in these areas, but they haven't been able to access these opportunities. So we work in agricultural value chains, from production to getting goods to market and everything that happens along the way. And we work to help improve economic opportunities in cacao, in coffee, in rubber, and in dairy, and whatever other opportunities there are. But those are four areas that we see as being highly productive. And when I say we work in some of the most difficult areas, some of you here are probably a lot more familiar with the geography of Colombia than I am, but some of the places that we work are southern Cordoba, northern Antioquia, parts of Meta, Caquetá, northern Cauca, and Tumaco. Excuse my pronunciation, but anyhow, that's where we work. And I had the pleasure of getting to Caquetá in the fall, and I'm telling you, this is a region that has really been neglected, and together with the government of Colombia, I think we really want to help improve economic opportunities there. And specifically, I was there to look at dairy production, and the Nestle Corporation is also working there to a large degree, and there's a lot of opportunity if we can just assist in the right areas. So, moving on to our main priorities in Colombia today are to address this income inequality gap, so that the Medellins and Bogotas of the world can connect with the Caquetás of the world in Colombia. And so we reduce the impact of having two Colombias and work towards one Colombia. So in so doing, we work at the national level and the local level. On the national level, we've worked in the policy area quite a bit, as well as provided advice and assistance on several things, including agrarian reform, transitional justice, truth-telling, and reintegration. We've helped stood up truth-telling issues so that people can actually reach closure on some of the issues that they've dealt with, and reintegration, transitional justice, and agrarian reform are all key areas for us. We've had a lot of lessons learned, but we've had some successes that I'd like to share. And one is that we've worked very hard to support the Colombian Agency for Reconciliation. We've helped to graduate over 10,000 ex-combatants and demobilized. And I'm telling you, that's not, it's not like they take a 2-day course and then graduate. This is long and sustained investment to work with these folks so that they can become full and contributing members to their society. So we're very proud of that accomplishment. USAID has also worked to stand up community service opportunities for demobilized and ex-combatants, and we've worked with over 6,000 of them, and we hope to reach 10,000 by the end of 2016. And what this means is, in order to graduate from this program, the demobilized and ex-combatants have the obligation to provide over 80 hours of community service, and there weren't that many opportunities for them to do so. We helped find those opportunities. And then over a 10-year period, we've worked with the Columbia Institute for Family Welfare to provide assistance to ex-combatants and demobilized, especially former child soldiers, because about 30% of the combatants are estimated to be children, average age of 13. So these are folks that have a long road ahead of them. They can be full contributing members of society if only they have the tools and the ability to do so. So we're very proud of that work, and we expect that should the peace accords, or when the peace accords are signed, that we will be working with thousands more, between 8 and potentially 30,000, and we are ready to do so. 30% of those, remember, are children. You probably talked about some of the human rights issues during the week, but we are fully supportive of all the human rights efforts, including, as you well know, that the forced recruitment is one of the 12 human rights violations that are covered by the Victims' Law. So this issue of child soldiers is very important. I'll end on our current programming by just talking about inclusive programming. It's very important to us that we address the issues of those who have been left out. And I already mentioned the rural areas, but within those rural areas, and sometimes some other areas, there are groups that have been very neglected. Afro-Colombian group is one, the indigenous population is another, women are another. So it's very important to us that our programming include these groups of people so that they can take part in peace as well as others. In terms of the Afro-Colombian and Indigenous group, we've helped stood up the Afro-Colombian and Indigenous program, ASIP, which focuses very much on youth and creating workforce development options so that these people have the skills and the tools to get jobs. And to date, we've assisted almost 10,000 Afro-Colombians and Indigenous people getting formal jobs. And we will work with many more. So that's on the supply side. We've also worked on the demand side and worked with private companies. We work very closely with the private sector. In this space, we work with them on diversity training. So we work with them to encourage them to attract Afro-Colombians and Indigenous and understand how they can be a force for their private company. I'll just end by, on this part, talking about humanitarian assistance, because I said AID has two lanes of effort, development and humanitarian. In Colombia, to some degree, our humanitarian assistance effort has really been related to the IDPs, the internally displaced persons. And the internally displaced have been those who have moved because of the civil war. They've moved within Colombia, but they've also moved outside of Colombia into Venezuela and Ecuador. So we have provided a grant to the International Organization of Migration to work with those IDPs to ensure that they can be contributing members wherever they work and that they get full benefits, whether it be health and education or whatnot, from those areas. So finally, Colombia in the future. What will we do differently? Well, honestly, we've been preparing to work on Colombia Peace. We have been working in this area for quite some time. So we're really not going to do a whole lot differently. We are going to scale up what we're already doing now. We have proven models that have worked. We work, again, very closely with Alejandro's team and the government of Colombia to look at those models, learn lessons from them, but scale up what has worked in more regions. So our plan is to increase this work that we're doing in 40 municipalities to add 20 more. We will work with the government to determine which geographic areas make sense. But again, they will likely be in some very difficult areas. And we don't shy away from those. That's our regular mission work will continue to do that. USAID also has an Office of Transition Initiatives, which is a quick, rapid response office within the agency, and we can, in fact, we already have stood up an office in Colombia to do quick, rapid response activities to support the peace process immediately. And this can be with quick impact programming, it can be helping with capacity building in a quick way to all support the long-term peace process. And victims. Victims are, of course, the center of all the programming. President Santos made this comment several times when he was up here in February and continues to make these comments. And we have worked with victims units in the past, and we will continue to do so. In fact, there was a Harvard study that we're looking at very closely. I don't believe it's been made public yet, but it's been instrumental at looking at the gaps in land restitution and reparations. We will look at that study as well as many others in order to do our analysis and formulate a way forward. So the main point here is Plan Colombia focused on security and counter drug. For our part, we will work mostly on alternative development. Peace Colombia, we will focus on reintegration, expanding state presence, justice and essential services, and continuing our work but scaling it all up. So in conclusion, I'll just tell you some challenges, opportunities, and lessons learned. Challenges for us are sustainability is the main challenge. We have a lot of, as I said, a lot of successes. We have a lot of gains that have been made. How do we sustain them? Colombia is very vulnerable to, could be very vulnerable to some backsliding. We hope to be there to prevent that and only move forward. But that will take continued presence. It does also cost money. And so there are many global competing priorities for U.S. government assistance that we need to look at. But we do plan to continue to be in Colombia in a robust way. In terms of other challenges, there's the messaging to the average Colombian. What does this mean to them? What does the peace process mean to them? And Colombia, and we hope to support them in demonstrating that there will be change and there will be positive benefits to the peace process for the average Colombian. In terms of opportunities for the U.S. government, really I come back to my initial comments on partnership. Colombia's been a great partner, will continue to be a great partner. We want to help enhance that partnership and work together, not only on political issues, but certainly on trade and economic issues. Colombia is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world. There are so many opportunities there for growth, for economic investment, for us to partner on so many levels, as well as increase trade. That's all very, very important. Lessons learned, sustained assistance works. So as I said, we've been in Colombia for 50 years. We've ramped up our investment over the years. It's changed. We've had to be flexible and nimble and agile and adapt to changing circumstances, but it's working. It could be a model for assistance elsewhere in the world, but it costs money. So I come back to that. There are competing priorities. The government of Colombia is picking up over 95% of the tab for Peace Colombia, but we want to be there and support to the extent we can with technical assistance, with advice, etc. And I'm so happy that Alejandro is my colleague in working with him on the donor agency that he runs in Colombia, because we have had several opportunities, and I hope we have many more, to work together and see Colombia in its next stage. So I think I'll end there. Juan, thank you very much.
Doctor Gamboa, tiene usted la palabra.
Thank you, Juan, and thank you, Sarah, for such an interesting presentation. I'm really glad to share with you this panel. And before that, I'd really like to thank the Harvard Colombian Student Society, the Fletcher Latin American Group, the Colombian Association at the MIT, and the Colombian Student Association at Boston University. Unfortunately, I couldn't join you, and I take the risk of losing this, environment that you are living there, and eventually not being that connected. I'm glad that we surpassed the technology challenges that we had, and well, let's try to have a nice conversation from from Colombia there and enjoying these moments. Well, let me tell you about APC Colombia as well. We are a pretty young agency. We have 4 years of history. It doesn't mean that we haven't been in charge of and coordinating the international cooperation here in Colombia, but President Santos realized about the importance of having one institution linked to the presidency and be in charge of the role of guiding and coordinating the international cooperation that we are receiving from our partners, and also enter in this new scenario, which is providing good lessons and also experiences in many development challenges that we can share with many other countries. So I say to the people that ask me about the agency, we have two hats. One is that of coordinating the international cooperation resources that are brought to Colombia, not only financing, but knowledge as well, technical assistance, which is very, very important, and also coordinating and guiding the knowledge and the good experiences that we have to share with the rest of the world. Sarah mentioned the importance for them, the triangle, the North Triangle in Central America. We do a lot in the North Triangle of Central America, and we do a lot in the Mesoamerica region and also in the Caribbean. So that is the challenge that we have ahead. We have a challenge of managing the post-conflict era, all the contributions that our partners, our usual partners, want to do and to keep partnering with them. And we also have the challenge of being a player, a global player in this developmental challenge that we have. So let me give you a little bit of context of the international cooperation in Colombia. If we have the last now almost 6 years of the President Santos presidency in 2 terms, we have had around 2,700 $2.7 billion in international cooperation financing to the country. almost 70% of these $2.7 billion that we have had from the international community come from 7 partners, being the US, the bigger one with around 35%, and then other participants like the European Union, Germany, Canada, Switzerland, Sweden, and Spain. These are great partners, and we do have this view of partnering with every single donor of Colombia. We see each other at the same level, we have very nice conversations, and yes, our role is to guide these interventions that we do together in the territory in the Colombian territory. That's a little bit of the context of the international cooperation in Colombia. So let me tell you a little bit of the roadmap that we have designed for the upcoming years. We designed at the beginning of last year a roadmap for international cooperation from 2015 to 2018, sorry. And we have 3 main areas of work to guide these interventions and these partnerships with donor countries and with other members of the international community, or what we call now international cooperation. It is very important to highlight, and it was agreed within the Addis Ababa meeting last year, that international cooperation is not only the usual donor contribution to our countries. It is a mix. It is this partnership that we can do with philanthropy, with private sector, foundations, with social responsibility, and of course with the traditional donors. All these partnerships, all these activities that we can do together are international cooperation nowadays. So I was telling you about the roadmap that we designed. We have three main areas. Of course, the first one is peace building, and it basically incorporates the activities that are mentioned, putting the victims at the center of the challenge that we have ahead. Of course, the reintegration activities, and basically taking into account all these architectures that the Colombian government has created to attend all the people involved in the conflict. So we are talking about activities that we do with the unit of victims, activities that we do with the unit of land reintegration, with the agency of reintegration, and of course now the most recent agency created, which is the Center of Historic Memory. It's very important to recognize what happened in Colombia so we do not repeat that history. And of course, all the activities that we can do with the social prosperity department, and well, now with the recently created Ministry of Post-conflicto. So this is the architecture that we have nowadays, and that's the challenge that we have within the peace building area, to interact with all these actors and having like an alignment of their programs with the programs that support the international cooperation agents. The other area is the sustainable rural development, and I highlight the sustainability challenge that Sarah presented and shared with us, and we agree with that. It's not only a matter of rural development, it's a matter of sustainable rural development. So that is another area that is very important, and putting the rural area of Colombia at the center, because the origin of our conflict comes from this rural Colombia, which doesn't belong to the middle-income country standards that we tell to the people and to the rest of the world Colombia is about. So we have the challenge to bring this other Colombia to the standards of this middle-income country that we are proud of and that we are keep building and now sharing experience of development. And the third area is environmental sustainability and conservation. This area, of course, incorporates the climate change and seeks basically to maximize the environmental benefits of the peace agreement. So we have here a roadmap aligned to the expectation of having or entering to a post-conflict era. These three main areas of our roadmap are totally consistent with the 6 key items that have been negotiating in Havana, and with the items that we expect that the ELN starts to negotiate soon with the Colombian government. So these are the three main areas, and so what are we doing now with this roadmap and the challenges that we have ahead? Main question, what would be the role of the international cooperation in the post-conflict? First of all, as Sarah also mentioned, these are not new actors. We have had very good partners for development, for peace building during the conflict. So the challenge is to transform the activities, to adapt their activities to the post-conflict era. And it's not that we need to change everything. No, we need probably to increase their activities, to have actually more land to interact and to make actions, and to basically face these challenge of bringing this other Colombia to the standards of these middle-income countries that we have now. But these partners have been key. The donors have been key during the conflict era, and we expect to have them and to have new actors of the international community to partner with us in the post-conflict era. Doing what? What we highlight here is the catalytic role of these partners. And we know and we are sure that most of the efforts that Colombia has to do during the post-conflict era would come from the Colombian taxpayers. But we are aware of this catalytic role of these partners. Doing what? Doing innovative programs or increasing the existing and successful ones that we have nowadays, and of course piloting new activities in areas where the state is not strong enough, and that's a very important challenge that we have in the post-conflict era. Although we have now control of the whole territory, the state is weak in many areas of the country, and these international community agents and these partners have credibility and have interacted with many organizations, local organizations, that have credibility in many areas. So we need to partner with these agencies, bringing the states and bringing this presence of the state and creating good projects for the peace building during the post-conflict era. I think Sarah had the opportunity to mention all the things that we have been doing with USAID. So I'll skip that, and I'll tell you a little bit of what are we doing and what in terms of the role of the international cooperation in post-conflict. During the past year and a half, and it is an ongoing process, we have been negotiating strategies with all these partners. These partners have multi-year strategies to come and to do projects in our country. What we have been doing during these years, this last year and a half, is negotiating the terms of these strategies, aligning the strategies with these main components of the peace building. What does it mean? Thinking on this architecture that the government has created so far to attend the victims and to attend all the people affected by the conflict. And I can tell you now that every single partner that we have in Colombia, with which we have negotiated strategies, incorporate in their strategies a very important chapter for peace building and the concept of post-conflict in these documents. So those will be the guidance for implementation of projects in the upcoming years. Additionally, we have recently, by the end of last year, we designed with the National Planning Department a policy document to basically present and encompass the role of the international cooperation within the post-conflict era. What do we want there, and what is the spirit of this document? Is to streamline all the international initiatives that Colombia is expected to benefit from the international community in a post-conflict era, and making sure that all these efforts are not dispersed, that are very aligned to the government initiatives and basically to the implementation of the peace agreements. We are maximizing all these international cooperation to use these resources and this technical cooperation, this knowledge, in the implementation of the peace agreements. So this policy document encompasses the idea of having one fund of funds, this like a kind of a holding fund called Colombia in Paz. And we are bringing these powerful multilateral organizations that have supported the country for its development. Basically, we are having the UN system, the European Union, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the World Bank as administrators or trustees of these four funds that are under the Peace Colombia Holding Fund to generate projects and to be the doors of reception of projects that have to be generated in the field with the right organization and with the right people in the territories, and bring all these projects to these funds so we are able to fund them. What we are recognizing here is that we need a lot of partners. This is not a matter of the government executing all the projects for the post-conflict. What we are realizing here is that we need a lot of partners. And well, what can be better than having the four main multilateral agents worldwide recognized as partners for development being part of these challenge. Of course, we have very important bilateral, let's say, agencies and partners like the USAID program that we are expecting to keep implementing the way that we have been implementing the projects with them. Why? Because we are recognizing that we have 15 years of history within Plan Colombia, that we have successful implementations and very good partners within these bilateral agendas. So we are also incorporating under this Colombia en Paz Fund the bilateral activities. And what are the incentives of having the funds managed by these multilateral agencies plus the bilateral partners under this umbrella? That we have two very good incentives for coordination. One is a board of an steering committee of these fund of funds called Paz Colombia that will guide the areas of interest, the most important projects to implement, and also we will have a fund, a trust fund created here in Colombia with a lot of flexibility for procurement and for implementation, to put resources in many of the projects that will be originated within the funds and within bilateral agendas or programs. So that is let's say the architecture that we have been designing to basically align the international cooperation with the huge effort that we have ahead, that, as I said before, the taxpayers, the Colombian taxpayers will fund. So at the end, we need to talk about just one agenda with many partners. And let me tell you one final comment and one I would call like our mantra and our engine of work in the post-conflict sphere. It's the power of partnerships. We strongly believe in the power of partnerships. We do believe that in every single project of development, post-conflict, whatever we call it, and the challenge actually that we have is to align the development agenda, let's say the SDGs agenda, our national plan, and the post-conflict agenda in one single agenda that would bring the other Colombia into the reality of this middle-income country. Doing what? Partnering with many parties. So as I was mentioning, we see that every single project in Colombia has to have the public dimension, the private dimension, and the social and the civil society dimension. We call it the triangle of success, and we are very obsessed on having this triangle of success in every single project that we implement for the post-conflict. I think that I prefer just to leave room for nice conversation and open the floor for interaction of this very interesting panel. Thank you, Juan.
Thank you, Director. So before I open up to questions, I have the really hard task of filling up for Professor Tyden's shoes and having to ask a couple of hard questions. I hope our panelists are not completely surprised. But so I have two very specific questions, one for each of our panel members. First for Saran. My question is, or the question that we have been discussing for the couple of days is there a moral responsibility of the international community to talk about symbolic reparations? Is there a moral responsibility of the international actors to present symbolic reparations to the people who have been part of a conflict? And how do you think USAID can help to appease those hard feelings, or to appease or to help rebuild moral agency on the victims of the post-conflict? And then the other question for Director Gamboa, the question is, how do you think that we can assure sustainability of all these efforts, even if we don't have a continuity in the policy or in the leading politics in Colombia? What happens if the tide shifts and we are not willing, or the political momentum of the peace process loses its strength? So Saran, maybe.
Great, thanks for the tough questions. Yeah. Yes, in terms of moral responsibility, we do believe it is a moral responsibility to be concerned about peace in Colombia. And so thank you for that question. We attempt to demonstrate this through some of the efforts that we've been involved in quite a robust way in Colombia. One is supporting the History of Memory Museum that Alejandro referenced. I'm not sure I have the exact title of the museum down straight, but I had the opportunity to visit the museum. Our support has helped that grow in a way that they do all kinds of activities for victims. They support truth-telling scenarios and training for victims of all sorts. So yes, in terms of reparations, we are looking together with the government of Colombia, looking at all options to support a system of reparations that would make a lot of sense. I think the area that is the most difficult in terms of reparations is land. It's a very prickly issue. It's a very difficult one for Colombia. What we do for our role is we can support by making available analysis and lessons from other efforts in which we've worked globally that they may be able to take a part in. So yes, it is very much our responsibility and a core value.
Thank you very much. Director? Dr. Gamboa?
Thank you, Juan. And yes, this is a very tough question, but the challenge the challenge is sustainability. And but let me tell you a little bit about what we have been doing during the conflict, and that would give us the idea of sustainability. If you check our national budget annually, you see that we have just investments. I'm not talking about functioning. I'm not talking about like having the institutions running. We are having investments annually more than $4 billion, the equivalent of more than $4 billion into the sector of social inclusion and reconciliation. That is a very important amount of resources for investment. So and that excludes, of course, health, defense, and social protection investments in other areas. But if you have just this line of investment in Colombia, it is basically the most important investment that we have been doing annually since we created this architecture for peace building that President Santos has been obsessed. And yes, what is behind all this architecture? Laws. And you need you basically need to implement a counter reform to basically eliminate all this architecture that we have created. So what we have now during the conflict is a very strong architecture to attend the people affected by the conflict. And as Sarah mentioned, 95% of these requirements are funded by Colombia. We have very good partners to pilot and to do more innovative things and to reach areas that we haven't been able to reach. But we, as the Colombian government, have clear that, that's a responsibility, and it's supported by laws and a very solid institutional architecture. So to eliminate that, it is a challenge, and I don't see very easily to eliminate all this architecture, because what is behind that? People. And you know, when you affect people, if you really eliminate this architecture. So I would say that these solid and strong institutional architecture that we have nowadays would bring sustainability to all these line of social inclusion and reconciliation. And I would also, I mean, the challenge that we have to align the usual investments that we have for development of the country with the peace agenda, and of course with the SDGs agenda. That's a challenge that we have, and we are putting a lot of effort. We are working together with the National Planning Department to basically have a development agenda of the country totally consistent with the challenges that we have for the implementation of the peace agreements. So that will give also the sense of sustainability and consistency and alignment. And also, I would mention the incentives behind the peace agreements if we reach them. All the dividends that are the peace dividends that are behind these political actions of reaching a peace agreement. The National Planning Department, and I encourage you to get into the webpage of the National Planning Department, has made a study on the general incentives of the peace and general dividends of the peace. And with a special focus of the environmental dividends of the peace agreements. And just to share with you one number, in terms of environmental dividend, if we reach a peace agreement, we will have around $1 billion saving a year for environmental degradation, for less environmental degradation, because you know that the guerrillas are causing many damage in our territories because of the oil pipeline destructions and their involvement in the coca growing business. So this third incentive would also provide would be an incentive for sustainability and keep moving this challenge that we have of the implementation of the agreements.
Director Gamboa, thank you very much. So now we open to questions from the audience, and also I want to remind everybody that who's following on streaming, you can send your questions through our social media to Facebook or Twitter, and we'll read them out loud. So I think there's a question down there. Could you? Thank you.
I'm so happy that you mentioned the flexibility and the adaptation that USAID has in Colombia, moving from Plan Colombia to Peace Colombia. I just want to ask if there is any sign of adaptation or new perspectives within the USAID in front of the way that the war on drugs is conducted. Because as you are very aware, President Santos has been trying to arise the issue of that the current strategy is maybe not working. Then I just wanted to know if there are new signs of some kind of adaptation or new perspectives from the war on drugs from the USAID program.
Okay. We have actually, we're very concerned, I should say, and I'm sure Alejandro shares this concern about the rise in drug production. So that's not great at this time. So we all are very concerned. We, for our part, USAID has moved on a little bit. So the adaptation is that it's not so much a focus of ours any longer to work on alternative development. For our part, we are still working in the rural areas, but we feel that our efforts can be best placed to work on state presence to address it from that angle. So we fully support what the government is doing to address these, what the, their work with the defense operations to address the drug issues, but it's a tough one. It's a really, really tough issue, and I'm so glad that Alejandro also brought up the issue of environmental sustainability, because in many of these rural areas where the drug trade is rampant, getting to the environmental issues as well is so, so important, so that beyond the drug trade, that these vulnerable populations don't fall prey to other illegal issues, such as illegal logging, illegal mining, other things like that. So our involvement has changed a little bit in that our focus is more on the state presence. So from an AID perspective, but we fully support everything that the government's doing to address it, and other parts of the U.S. government are still addressing the drug trade, State Department and others. So it's not so much ours, because we feel that our manageable interest is in these other areas.
We have a question up there.
Piggybacking on that question, when you say support state presence in the regions, I was wondering if you could elaborate that, and whether that means something other than military presence, and is the overarching strategy at all trying to go towards a less militarized approach towards international drug policy, both in Colombia and abroad?
Right. Yeah, when I say state presence, I'm not at all talking about military presence from the USAID perspective. What we're talking about are local institutions that can, that have the capacity to provide services to the citizens of that community. So when we talk about building institutional capacity, we're talking about the educational units that might work in that area, the health units, the hospitals, things of that nature. Also, perhaps justice organizations that can get free legal aid if possible to people, or inform people of their rights and things like that. So those are the sorts of things, those are the sorts of institutions that USAID would support and help improve the capacity, again, to get those services to citizens so they can be full members of the society. We don't work with any of the armed forces in that regard.
Alejandro, if you want to jump in, please feel free to jump in whenever you want to answer each of these questions. We have.
Okay, let me add a little bit on the concept of the state presence and how the international cooperation as a whole contributes to the state presence. And yeah, from our point of view, we as an agency of international cooperation, in terms of development, we do not manage, and we do not include in our, let's say, coordination role, the defense and the security chapter of the international cooperation provided to Colombia. So I can purely talk about state presence besides these security and defense contributions that we receive from many partners. And just to illustrate you what could be a state presence, basically, the construction of a house of justice in a very isolated place of Colombia, and bringing the right solutions in terms of people able to resolve problems in the local areas, and that are problems totally different than the ones that we have in Bogota or in Medellin or in other parts. Are problems because the lack of trust within the communities, or because of the different conflicts that have because of racial or gender issues. So these kind of interventions and real cooperation in terms of an infrastructure, a house of justice, and people to resolve problems, to resolve conflicts within the communities are very important. But that's just one example. I would say that the Agency for the Integration has received a very important support from the international cooperation to improve their programs, to make it more sophisticated, and now we are proud of saying that we
sorry, Alejandro? Okay, we are having again some technical issues. I think that's kind of the motive of the day. But maybe we can try to continue with a question over here for Sarah Ann. Are there? Yeah, there's one question over there.
First of all, thank you for the U.S. government for all the support. I have two really specific questions. The first one is regarding the kind of aid that the U.S. gives to Colombia. I was wondering, looking forward, how much of it is tied aid and American companies have to be hired in order to disburse the development aid that was promised. Second one of the historic drivers of violence in Colombia has been the systematic killings of political supporters, in particular the left-wing supporters. Sadly, in the previous months, there's been systematic killings of members of Marcha Patriótica. So I was wondering, since the USAID is doing promotion for democracy, how much is the protection of these people who think different how society should be ruled, but are part of the democratic system, or want to be part, as long as they're not killed?
Okay, in terms of your first question, our aid is, the tied aid, that term, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, but we have certain goals and objectives that and I start in the beginning, I talked about these country development strategic plans that we operate under that rubric, and that's what we do in Colombia as well. We have a country development strategic plan. It has specific goals and objectives. That's where we operate, and our assistance completely supports those. To operate the programs and projects that we have in Colombia, yes, we operate with contractors and grantees. Some of them are U.S., some are international, some of them are international organizations, not necessarily international companies, and a lot of them are local. Actually, USAID, another core value of ours is local institutions and local solutions is what we call it. And so we have specific goals within the agency to work with as many local institutions as we can and to increase that over the years more and more. And frankly, it depends on the country and where we operate, whether we're successful or not. So I can compare certain other countries in the hemisphere, like we have this as a core value throughout the globe and throughout the hemisphere, but there are certain countries that have a longer way to go, like a Haiti, for example, where we have to do a lot more in terms of capacity building with these organizations before they can accept U.S. government resources. Colombia has a much higher capacity because we've been working with these institutions for a long, long time. So we are working more and more with those local institutions. But one thing to keep in mind, these are U.S. government resources. These are U.S. taxpayer resources. So what I have the fun job of doing is defending these resources to Congress on Capitol Hill, and they want to know, where are these tax dollars being spent? Where are they spent? Are they being spent well? So we have to have critical oversight on all of these dollars, and frankly, not every organization is able to accept them. So we work to increase that all the time. It is a core value of what we do, and increase our goals to work more and more with local organizations. So I hope that gets to your question there. And then in terms of working with those who speak out and who don't feel protected, again, our attempt is to be as inclusive as possible with all groups in every program that we do. We're certainly, not perfect in this. We've learned a lot over the years, but one thing we've realized, if we're not inclusive, we won't have fully successful programs. So we work with, as I said, Afro-Colombians. We work with indigenous communities. We work with women's organizations. Women have been very negatively impacted by the war, and so there are all kinds of things that we address, including gender-based violence. So we work with all of these communities, as well as youth, LGBTI groups, et cetera, to help them have a voice. And this is our work with civil society, to grow those organizations, to help to ensure that these groups have a say in how peace in Colombia develops.
So Alejandro, good to have you back. We just kept on with a question because of the connection issues. I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. So there's one over there in the back, and okay. So go ahead.
Hello, my name is Jessica. I am studying environmental studies and currently I'm working with the Office for Sustainability at Harvard. My question is for Sarah. I was wondering, you talk about how you are trying to have sustainable projects in rural communities, sustainable not just in terms of the environmental sustainability, but just economic sustainability and so on. My question is how or what initiatives are you guys using so that those communities are less dependent on government assistance and more independent, let's say, to build more entrepreneurship programs in rural areas where agronomic, where the agriculture can be more developed in a way that those farmers can benefit not just by trading with other countries, but by developing their agriculture within Colombia. So I wanted to know specifically what are the tools that you guys are using in order to make those projects less dependent on both the government and foreign assistance and more independent and stronger.
Great question. Thank you so much. So our goal, and probably one of the only organizations you'll hear from that will say this, but our goal is to work ourselves out of a job. I mean, honestly, that is the goal, is that the international aid, the assistance from the U.S. government goes down and other organizations take off. And specifically, it's the work with the private sector. The private sector will be the engine of true change and true sustainability. So what our job is to give these organizations, these groups, these farmers, whatever, the tools so that they can be making these pitches themselves. So they don't, it isn't a set of projects in some rural area, but it's truly, there will truly be economic investment because they've proven that they have something to sell. And I mentioned some of the products that we're working with, and our, what I neglected to mention is that we've had a great ability to leverage private sector investment in Colombia because it does have so much to offer. But some of what they have to offer has been in these very insecure areas. So to the extent we can help make those areas more secure, the private sector will be more likely, will be more willing to enter these areas and help fund that change themselves, which will further lead to sustainability. So our job, again, is to give the tools to make that happen, but not to be there forever to ensure that it happens. We surely won't be able to do that if you look around the globe and see all the priorities that we're facing as an international organization of assistance. It's just not feasible. And again, in terms of peace, Alejandro reiterated what I said earlier, is that 90% of this is being funded by Colombia itself. And so that includes their existing resources, plus they're doing some work with royalties of some of the revenue that they've gained from this great biodiverse country to send those resources to these regions to further that development. I don't know if Alejandro wants to add any more.
Yes, if I may jump in there, I think that now the international cooperation and the usual donors and aid community are more open to make investments rather than contributions. And I think that it is a very good choice, and we have been encouraging our different partners to partner within equity funds and with social investment funds that we value pretty much. And it is totally linked with what I mentioned before, which is this triangle of success. In projects or bigger initiatives where you have the public sector, the private sector, and civil society working together, you definitely add more probability for sustainability of every single intervention. So we really are encouraging our partners not to have like isolated projects in its majority funded by aid, and rather moving to these kind of social investments where you have the participation of these different actors and you bring the community in the decision making of the project or the initiative, and you don't know how it increases the probability for the sustainability of the initiative. So that is what we expect, for example, in the context of post-conflict, to having more investments. And what is the power of having investments, but from the aid perspective, or non-reimbursable resources as an investment? It allows the private sector to take higher risks as a partner of this project, because, well, you know that private sectors do not take higher risks. But if you have a non-reimbursable resource in such an initiative or in such a project, you basically reduce at the end the risk to the private sector, and you have it as a partner in these kind of initiatives in isolated areas or in places where you need to create basically opportunities for work or for production in Colombia.
Okay, and I think we have a last question. I'm going to give it to our Twitter followers who are actually streaming. We wanted to make this an inclusive conference, so hopefully you have it over there.
Yeah, we have a question from Juan Martinez S, and he's asking both, especially to the APC. Well, he asked, does USAID or APC Colombia have considered to create partnerships with the private sector to work in development projects?
So that piggybacks a little bit on the last question, but I will say, again, working with the private sector is a critical function of what we do in development, because we see the private sector as being the engine of change in many places in the world, including in Colombia. Specifically, we have public-private partnerships that we encourage, and in Latin America and the Caribbean, we have a quarter of all of USAID's public-private partnerships in this region. And out of that quarter, we have, I forget the percentage, but we have over 70, I know, public-private partnerships in Colombia. So the reason why I mention that, it's a clear indication that there are opportunities and there's a great interest in the private sector of partnering and further growing in Colombia.
Alejandro?
Well, yes, we are promoting this kind of yes. Are you hearing me?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that with that, and because we are almost about time, so we want to, first of all, from the organizing team, thank both our speakers, and I would invite the audience to give them a round of applause for that effort. And so we want to thank all of you for being here, and especially for bearing with us with all the technical glitches and difficulties, but hopefully you enjoyed this. And please remember, we are back here at 2 p.m. for our next panel. Only 2 more events to go. It has been a great week, but it would be great to having all of you here back at 2 p.m. Thank you very much. Alejandro, thank you very much for your virtual participation. Ms. Lynch, thank you, and have a nice lunch.
Thank you.
I know you had your hand up.
I'm sorry about that.
Sorry about that. Yeah.